Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and quick video really. I just wanted to give my thoughts on the House of Lords yet again blocking the employment rights bill last night. It came actually as a shock to everyone. The government, business groups, unions thought they'd done a deal and that it should now pass. And it hasn't done. Now, I want to start off with something here from the Electoral Reform Society, which sounds like it's on a slightly different topic, but I want to tie it in with this. So the Electoral Reform Society have said they're attacking the fact that Keir Starmer has just appointed some new peers to the House of Lords, including 25 Labour peers. Keir Starmer himself not long ago described the wholly unelected and grossly bloated House of Lords as indefensible. Nothing has changed since then, so it is deeply disappointing to see even more peers being stuffed into the upper chamber. So, it is stuffed. The chamber is absolutely rammed. It's ridiculously bloated. There's more members of the House of Lords than any other legislative house in any democratic country anywhere in the world. It's utterly ridiculous. They, of course, are not democratically appointed. They are just appointed, which means in theory there's no limits to how many there can be, and you get this ridiculous arms race where when the Conservatives are in power they shove a load of their own peers in there, so they're more likely to get their way in the House of Lords, and then when Labour come into power they have to do the same. So what I'm saying here is the criticism of Starmer is utterly pointless until the House of Lords can be replaced with an elected body. This is going to have to happen, and last night's vote shows why. The Lib Dem peers, who were also blocking the Employment Rights Bill before, and they shouldn't have done that either, that is against their own convention, they were voting with Labour last night. So they have said, yes, we've got this agreement. So the agreement, and I've talked about this before, was instead of day one rights against unfair dismissal, which was in Labour's manifesto, they will have it from 6 months, but they'll also tighten up a few other things. They'll tighten up the rules on probation and remove the cap on compensation. And unions were happy with this. Of course, unions were happy. Well, unions and business groups had to concede here. The unions were happy with moving the day one right on unfair dismissal to 6 months. They said, OK, we can agree with that because you're tightening up the rules on probation and removing the cap on compensation. The business groups, who of course benefited from that day one right being transferred to 6 months, but they conceded on lifting the cap on compensation, which remember, compensation is only paid if you break employment law. So good employers don't mind that anyway. They're not ever going to have to give out compensation, right? So business groups conceded, unions conceded. They both came to agreement with the government, and they thought with the House of Lords as well. And then the House of Lords blocks it. Now, I'm just going to remind people, the House of Lords should not be blocking this, not just because they've done a deal where everyone else was acting in goodwill, including the Lib Dem peers. The Salisbury Convention, I will remind people, I mentioned this before, the Salisbury Convention for the House of Lords. Because the House of Lords is unelected, it should not block something with a public mandate. Now, the way this works is House of Commons passes legislation. It sends it to the House of Lords to revise it. The House of Lords looks at it and goes, OK, we need to work on this. It's not quite good. We're going to suggest some amendments for you. And then they send those amendments to the House of Commons. The House of Commons then can decide whether or not it approves of those amendments. So it will either vote for them or vote against them, right? If it votes for all of them, then it's fine. It goes off to become law. And if it votes against any of them, it has to go back to the House of Lords. Now, at this point, the House of Lords can choose to stick by their guns a little bit, or they can choose to go, do you know what? You're the elected chamber, do what you like. And usually it's that second one that they do. However, if the legislation has a public mandate, for example, as a result of a referendum, or as a result of being a manifesto promise for the winning party that has formed the government, they're not supposed to block it. The Salisbury Convention says you can have one go at revising it. If the House of Commons still rejects it, leave it alone. Well, this was a manifesto promise that they're trying to block. And that shouldn't happen. So what I would be doing at this point, now Labour have said, to be fair, the Labour government have said, look, we're not having any more concessions. We did a deal. We did it in good faith. Business groups did a deal. Unions did a deal. We did a deal. Even the Lib Dem peers did a deal. The Tories are the ones who are just mindlessly blocking it, right? So Labour has said they're going to have it. They're going to send it back next Tuesday. The House of Commons has to obviously now review these amendments. They're running out of time for that. So they're going to do that on Monday, which is the earliest they could realistically do it. And then they're sending it straight back to the House of Lords on Tuesday. And they've said if the House of Lords still carries on being difficult, they're not ruling out opening up more sittings. And I think it's the fire brigade union, but one union has actually suggested make them sit on Saturday to get it done if necessary. Labour really want this passed before Christmas, and the reason being because some of the effects, technically a couple of the effects will apply immediately, but that's because of a repeal of Tory anti-strike legislation. In terms of the new features of the legislation, it's supposed to start coming into force from April. So you don't just want to introduce a law one day and have it enforced the next day. You want to give businesses a bit of time. So Labour want it passed before Christmas. It should have been passed months ago. The Lord should have passed this months ago. But they want it passed before Christmas to give businesses that time. What the Tory peers are doing in the House of Lords here is not in the interests of business groups. Business groups have already agreed to this. It's not in the interest of unions, not in the interest of workers, not in the interest of anyone but themselves, who would just want to frustrate the democratically elected government, right? So I would go further. Yes, absolutely say we're going to sit and sit and sit until you get this passed. We're not messing about. But I would go further, because imagine this happening later in the Parliament. Imagine you're closing on the election and the government need to pass some legislation that they hadn't really planned for, but it needs doing to deal with something what they might consider some emergency legislation. And the House of Lords, knowing that they can block it indefinitely, does that. What do you do? What do you do? I say this should be nipped in the bud. I say what Keir Starmer should do is say, right, we're sending it back next Tuesday. If it doesn't pass, I'm going to work on some more legislation. And I have suggested this is way the House of Lords should work. I think the Salisbury Convention should be baked into law. But more than that, stronger than that, because it can be a bit subjective as to what is and is not a manifesto promise. So I would say the following. The House of Lords, as a revising chamber, should be given one crack at revising legislation, right? So have the normal process. House of Commons passes legislation and sends it to the House of Lords. House of Lords adds amendments, goes back to the House of Commons. Let's say the House of Commons doesn't agree with some or all of those amendments, so they vote it down. What should happen at that point? I am going to suggest this could be a new legislation that Starmer could threaten, right? What we're going to do is we're going to say, rather than send it back to the House of Lords, the House of Commons will have one vote on the legislation. If it gets at least 65% of MPs supporting it, it goes straight to royal assent. It doesn't go back to the House of Lords. Change the way parliamentary procedures are done in law to that. Now, if I was Starmer, I would say I'm going to write that legislation. If you don't pass it next Tuesday, I'm going to write that legislation and present it to the House after Christmas, right? The House of Lords could obviously then block that legislation. That's fine. I would say that's fine, because then in the next session of Parliament, I'm going to ram it through with the Parliament Act. So basically, you squeeze the House of Lords balls here. Absolutely use that and keep it in your back pocket. If they look like doing it again, it's one thing to revise something. I'm going to remind people at the end of the last Parliament, when the Conservatives wanted to pass their Rwanda bill, which they thought was really vital for winning the election, right? They were wrong, by the way. It was the stupidest thing they could have done at that point. But they thought it was a really important piece of legislation. They had no public mandate for it. No public mandate for it. It wasn't a manifesto promise. They hadn't had a referendum. It was just legislation they made up because they thought they needed it. Went to the House of Lords. The House of Lords went, this is bollocks, and they sent it back. The House of Commons removed the Lords' amendments and sent it back, and the House of Lords went, do you know what, you're the elected body, we'll let it through. Including Labour peers. Labour peers took the view, at the time I made a video on this saying I hope they're getting this right, Labour peers even said, look, we're about to enter government, we don't want to set a precedent of defying the will of the elected chamber. And so they let it pass, even though it was a terrible piece of legislation and there was no public mandate for it. This is how the Tory peers are repaying that. So I would play hardball. That is what I would say on this. But there it is anyway. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.